Hey y'all, welcome to Most of It, where I talk about most things that I find interesting. You read the title, so you know what today's video is about. The Tau get too much hate in the fan base, and so I'm here to help put some respect on their name, hopefully. So here I'll be covering some of their history and discussing why I think they get so much hate. So without further ado, let's get into this. The first records we have of the Tau are from the Mechanicum that discovered them around the 35th millennium. The Tau's tech was around humanity's Stone Age at this time, with them just learning how to use fire. The Mechanicum made a note of them, and since they were nowhere near a threat, they decided they would come back at a later date and just left. Due to some warp storms, however, they would completely forget about them and wouldn't see them again for a long time. The Tau were initially a relatively small group of tribes on the planet Tau. Yep, that's where they get their name. There were 4 Tau tribes who were called the Fire, Water, Earth, and Air tribes, and they lived in peace and harmony until one day the Fire tribe attacked. Oh no, my bad, wrong script. Here we go. The 4 tribes were at war pretty consistently, but they really got into it during something called the Montau. The 4 tribes fought a 5-year-long war, and since there was a war going on during this time, the farmers couldn't really do their thing, and so starvation began to set in and many began to die. But this is when 2 new Tau showed up and managed to parley with the head of the tribes. These 2 introduced themselves as Ethereals, a before now unheard of Tau tribe, and told everybody of their cause. They spoke of peace and a concept they called the greater good, where each Tau individual helps each other work toward a greater goal. The tribes would like the sound of this and would start a truce, ending the war. More Ethereals would emerge, and seeing the newfound peace, they would begin organizing. The Tau were divided into 5 castes, with each one being a group specializing in specific things. They are the Fire caste, who are the Tau warriors, with the strongest individuals being sorted into them. The Earth caste, who are essentially the Tau's Mechanicum, responsible for manufacturing, farming, and general production. Earth is the largest of the castes and is made up of the most industrious of the Tau, with generally plain-looking individuals making up their ranks. The Water caste is essentially the Tau's diplomatic relations department, responsible for establishing trade routes and recruiting new races into the Tau Empire, which we'll cover later. Members of the Water caste are generally taller and slimmer than most others, and if Reddit is to be believed at all, they are all very attractive women. The Air caste have multiple functions, with them acting as messengers and running the defense forces, while the Fire caste handles the offensive stuff. Members of the Air caste are taller and slimmer than the Water caste and are often called the Invisible caste as they are rarely seen. And finally, the Ethereal caste, who are the Tau's politicians and religious leaders. The Ethereals look similar to the Fire and Water caste, but have a diamond-shaped bone thing in their foreheads. They're the leaders of the Tau as a whole, and that's pretty convenient for them. There are theories that the Ethereals were able to get the tribes to work together through use of some, mind control pheromones, and this is one of the first criticisms of the Tau. Well, maybe not criticism, but at least memes about them, that they're all just space communists. I mean, a charismatic group shows up, unites warring tribes, using a promise of working together and sharing the products of their efforts, and that same group just so happens to put themselves in the role of leadership. Sounds pretty sus to me. And yeah, there's a good amount of truth to that analysis. My question is, why aren't there more communist factions in 40k? I mean, just look at all the successful communist nations on Earth. Oh. Yeah, never mind. But anyway, back to the Tau. They aren't really helping themselves in the not communist department, and the fact that the head of the Ethereals, named Anva, was assassinated, and the other Ethereals covered it up and used AI and holograms to make it seem like he's still alive. Yeah, that seems like something space communists would do. The caste systems became the main structure of Tau society, with individuals being sorted into them at birth. You aren't allowed to marry outside of your caste, and you are assigned a partner to reproduce with by the government. There are ranks within each of the castes, and your social status depends wholly on your rank in Tau society. Now that they were organized into their borderline Orwellian castes and working together, the Tau progressed rapidly and would establish their first colony, and around the 37th millennium even managed to colonize their own moon. Their technology took off, and they began expanding their empire to other worlds, and unlike the Imperium, they actually incorporated other races in as well. The Tau are often described as the 40k version of the Covenant from Halo, except nicer. Just a bunch of alien races coming together and working toward a dream. This is for the most part accurate, but it's important to remember the Tau are only nice by 40k standards. You drop them into Star Trek or Star Wars and they're immediate villains. As I said before, their societal structure is very strict, and they employ things like sterilization if you don't play along. The Tau may be willing to bring other races into their empire, but it's still very clear that if you aren't specifically of the Tau race, then you are lesser and will be treated as such. And with races like the Vespid race, It is heavily implied that the Tau employs some form of mind control and surveillance to control the race. People say that the Tau are too nice for 40k, but they still aren't exactly good people. Well, except for one guy, but we'll talk about him later. The Tau are the youngest faction in 40k, and so they are still pretty firmly in their expansion and progression phase. They will give any race at least one chance to join them, and this has backfired for them in the past. They once tried to partner with the Dark Eldar, and yeah, that went about as well as you would expect. There's some really interesting moments in the lore that illustrate the Tau's naivety, like when they fought the Imperium during, I believe it was the Damocles Crusade, where the Tau were able to bring down a dreadnought and brought it back with them to analyze it. Well, they crack it open and find a dude inside that they come to find out is older than their entire empire. And he's just a troop. A big, stompy, powerful troop, but a troop nonetheless. You know that time when Garville, Loken, and Lucius were sparring, and Lucius is trying a bunch of fancy, elegant sword moves on him, and Loken just punches him in the face? Yeah, the Tau are Lucius, and Loken is just about every other faction, but especially the Imperium. Because the Tau, despite their age, have tech that matches or surpasses everyone except, I'd say, the Necrons. Because unlike the Mechanicum, they actually seek to improve their tech and build new stuff. Along with this progression, they became pretty specialized in their warfare and sorted out most of their problems at long range. This was the way they fought wars, and so when they fought the other factions for the first time, they were pretty regularly thrown for a loop, when the Imperium just drops Marines in melee range and starts beating their lights out. This is one of the biggest complaints about the Tau, that they are too specialized both on the tabletop and in lore, because they are the shooting army. They don't have psychic powers, as their souls shine pretty insignificantly in the warp. Their melee exists, but that's about all that can be said for it. But I see this as a positive and fitting for the faction. The Tau are young, and despite their decent amount of worlds, they are still a very small group when compared to most other factions, except maybe the Eldar. So to me, it makes perfect sense that they'd be hanging back and using their superior tech to win their wars with overall fewer losses. And I've been talking about it a lot, so I guess I should probably give y'all some more details about the Tau's weaponry. As you've probably seen with their minis, they use a lot of Gundam-looking mech suits, which are really cool. They do your standard mech suit things, flying, shooting, shields, all that. They also use drones, like a lot, and to run these drones, they use forms of AI, which the Imperium isn't too happy about. Their standard battle rifles are plasma weapons. Yeah, the thing that's considered one of the most powerful and elite weapons in the Imperium, that'll kill you if you use it wrong? Yeah, that's what they give to their infantry. And they don't explode near as often, so that's cool. They run your standard sci-fi weapons like railguns, fusion blasters, and ion cannons. They also make larger use of aircraft than most factions, with some pretty cool ships like the Manta and the Razor Shark. Funny enough though, despite their tech being great, especially for their age, one of the Tau's biggest weaknesses is their travel capability. Since there are no Psyker Tau, they can't navigate the warp, and so rather than traveling through it like the Imperium, they just kind of use it like a battery to power their drives and kind of dip in and out between dimensions. This is a lot slower than the Imperium's warp drive, and so they can't get places near as fast as others. So I said before, the Tau will try to team up with pretty much any race at least once, but they do still have groups that they shoot on sight. The main four are the Tyranids, Chaos, Dark Eldar, and the Orcs, for obvious reasons. But the Tau have a real hatred for the Orcs specifically, and a lot of that's thanks to this guy, Commander Farsight. Remember how I said there's really only one good guy? Well, this is him. Commander Farsight is the commander of the Fire Caste and leader of the Farsight Enclaves, and this guy is not a fan of Orcs. He despises their destructive nature and sees them as what they are, a mindless force of destruction. He is, interestingly enough, an exile of the Tau Empire due to him disobeying orders and disagreeing with the caste systems. Farsight's actually a good person and saw the Ethereals control as tyranny with a mask of kindness over it, and so he just kind of left it behind. He still defends the Tau Empire, but he does it on his own terms and with his own troops, called the Farsight Enclaves. He wields a sword known as the Dawn Blade, which he found on some alien planet. The sword actually has some sort of enchantment on it where every time he kills someone with it, their would have been remaining lifespan gets added to his. He doesn't know this, and if he did, he probably would hate himself for it, but he's starting to get suspicious of the Dawn Blade. And interestingly enough, both Khorne and Tzeentch are keeping an eye on Farsight, seeing him as a future potential champion. Crap, how'd I get this far without talking about the Kroot? The Kroot are these bird-like aliens that the Tau found under attack by the Orcs. They of course helped them out, and the Kroot joined the Empire. They're pretty cool overall. They're kind of like these jungle fighter aliens, and they're able to eat their enemies and absorb specific traits from them, which means they have a lot of variety in look. This is really cool because they kind of work like a vaccine. where an enemy race gets introduced to them and they eat one of them and gain what they need to beat them next time. This doesn't just work physically though, they can also absorb cultural traits as well. Like, it's been seen if a Kroot eats a Drukhari, they become smarter and crueler. The leader of the Kroots are called Shapers, and they are typically the smartest ones that help choose what traits everyone else should eat. The Kroot specialize in melee, which makes up for the Tau's lack in that department, and overall they're just really cool, and I like them and hope to see them more support on the tabletop for them. There are some other anti-Tau points people make, and one of them is that they're always winning. The Tau somehow win almost every battle they're in, and it seems like their enemies constantly get nerfed for them to do so. These are pretty valid criticisms, but I'm gonna just say this. With how new the Tau are, they've got to have some hype up material, and with how small they are in the lore, a loss or two for them could potentially cripple them. I also like to think that the Tau know how small they are, and thus train to become really elite to compensate. People also say they're too nice for 40k, but like I said earlier, they aren't actually that nice, and they're young yet. Give them time. I'm sure the galaxy will find a way to turn the Tau into the bitter murder hobos that we know and love the other factions for being. Or not. I'd be pretty cool with them staying the way they are. In a setting as grimdark as 40k, it's nice to have at least one faction that's bright-eyed and ready to take on the galaxy. So that's a lore dump / my opinions on the Tau and why I think they're overhated. But what do you think? Let me know down below. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and be sure to check out my community tab where I'm currently running weekly Primarch battle brackets. I'm also currently doing a multi-part timeline series of 40k, so check that out if you're interested. And let me know what topics and characters you'd like to see me cover next. And with all that said, I'll see y'all later.